The grand hall of Axiom Prime stretched for miles in every direction, and Ambassador Elena Vance had never felt so small in her entire life. She stood on a floating platform at the center of the chamber, surrounded by thousands of alien species who had traveled from every corner of the galaxy to witness this moment. The year was 2347, and humanity had finally done it. They had built ships that could cross the stars, and now they stood before the Galactic Concord to ask for membership. Elena wore her best diplomatic suit, dark blue with silver trim, and she carried herself with all the dignity she could manage. Behind her, a holographic display showed images of Earth, its blue oceans, green forests, and glittering cities. She had practiced her speech 100 times, and she believed in every word she was about to say. "Honored members of the Galactic Concord," she began, her voice steady and clear. "Humanity comes before you today not as conquerors or beggars, but as fellow travelers in the great journey of existence. We have much to learn from you, and we believe we have much to offer in return." The silence that followed was not the respectful kind. Elena could feel it, a cold, dismissive quiet that made her skin prickle. Then the laughter started. It began with the Velkari delegation, towering insectoid beings with shells like polished obsidian and eyes that glowed with ancient wisdom. Their leader, a creature called High Chancellor Velmothra, rose to speak, and his voice echoed through the chamber like thunder. "Fellow members of the Concord, forgive my amusement," he said, "but I cannot help myself. These creatures call themselves worthy of membership, yet they live for barely 100 rotations around their little star. 100 rotations. My morning meditation lasts longer than their entire civilization has existed." More laughter rippled through the assembly. Elena felt her face grow hot, but she kept her composure. Next came the Visari, beings of pure energy who floated in containment fields, because they had evolved beyond the need for physical bodies millions of years ago. Their speaker, a swirling mass of golden light, pulsed with what Elena could only interpret as contempt. "They still use meat bodies," the Visari said, and the translator made their voice sound like wind chimes in a storm. "They eat food and drink water and sleep for a third of their already pathetic lives. How can such primitive organisms contribute anything of value to our great alliance?" Elena opened her mouth to respond, but she was cut off by the dominion of Kreth. These were warriors, massive reptilian creatures covered in natural armor, with claws that could tear through steel and teeth designed for crushing bone. Their empire had conquered 100 worlds before joining the Concord, and they had never lost a single war. "Let us speak of military matters," the Kreth commander growled, his yellow eyes fixed on Elena with predatory interest. "What weapons do your people possess? Do you have plasma lances that can cut through starship hulls? Do you have void shields that can stop antimatter bombs? Do you have psychic warriors who can kill with a thought?" Elena hesitated for just a moment before answering honestly. "We have none of those things," she admitted. "Our weapons are simpler. Projectiles, explosives, directed energy in its basic forms. But we are quick learners, and we—" The Kreth commander threw back his head and roared with laughter. "Projectiles. She speaks of throwing rocks at her enemies. Perhaps next she will tell us that her people fight with pointed sticks." The entire assembly erupted in mockery. Species that had not spoken to each other in centuries found common ground in their amusement at these strange, short-lived creatures from the outer spiral arm. Elena stood firm. She did not cry, though she wanted to. She did not run, though every instinct screamed at her to flee. She simply waited for the laughter to die down, and then she spoke again. "I understand that we seem primitive to you," she said, "and I understand that our lives are brief by your standards. But I ask you to consider what we have accomplished in our short time. We went from living in caves to walking on our moon in less than 10,000 years. We went from horses and carts to starships in just 5 centuries. What might we accomplish if given the chance to learn from you? High Chancellor Velmothra raised one of his many limbs to silence the crowd. His compound eyes studied Elena with something that might have been curiosity or might have been pity. Your passion is noted, Ambassador, he said, and your species is not without some small charm. Therefore, the Concord will grant humanity observer status. You may exist in your small corner of space, and you may watch our proceedings from afar. You may not expand your territory, you may not acquire advanced technology, and you may not vote on any matter before this assembly. Consider this a gift. Many species were simply destroyed when they reached too far too fast. Elena wanted to argue. She wanted to demand equal treatment, to insist that humanity deserved better. But she looked around at the thousands of alien faces, all of them ancient, all of them powerful, all of them looking at her like she was an amusing pet who had learned a clever trick. She bowed her head in acceptance. Humanity thanks the Concord for its generosity, she said, and the words tasted like ash in her mouth. When she returned to Earth, the leaders of every nation were waiting for her. They had watched the proceedings through the quantum link, and they were furious. Presidents and prime ministers shouted about dignity and respect. Generals demanded to know why she had not fought harder. Elena let them rage until they exhausted themselves, and then she spoke. They made a mistake today, she said quietly. A terrible, foolish mistake. They looked at our short lives and saw weakness. They looked at our simple weapons and saw primitives. But they did not look closely enough. They did not see what we accomplish within those short lives. They did not see how quickly we adapt, how fiercely we fight, how stubbornly we refuse to accept defeat. She looked at each leader in turn, and her eyes were hard as diamonds. Let them laugh, she said. Let them mock us and dismiss us and forget about us. That is fine, because one day, sooner than they think, they will need us. And on that day, we will show them exactly what humanity can do. The room fell silent. No one laughed now. No one mocked. They simply listened as Ambassador Elena Vance laid out her plan, a plan that would take decades to unfold. A plan that required patience and sacrifice and absolute secrecy. The galaxy had underestimated humanity. They would learn to regret that decision. 50 years passed like a heartbeat for the ancient species of the Galactic Concord, but for humanity, 50 years was a lifetime of change. In their small corner of space, forbidden from trading for advanced technology, humans did what they had always done. They improvised. They studied the scraps of alien tech that fell into their hands. They reverse-engineered what they could and invented what they could not. They built research stations on frozen moons and mining colonies in asteroid belts. They worked in secret, always watching, always learning, always preparing. The Concord paid them no attention. Why would they? Humans were mayflies, brief flickers of consciousness that would burn out long before they became relevant. The great powers of the galaxy had more important matters to consider. But something was stirring in the darkness between the stars. At the very edge of the galaxy, where the light of civilization did not reach, ancient sensors began to detect strange readings. Ships sent to investigate never returned. Colonies on the outer rim went silent. One by one, their final transmissions filled with screaming and static. The Concord received these reports and dismissed them at first. Pirates, they said. Equipment failures, they said. Nothing to worry about. Then the hollow revealed itself. It came from the void like a wave of darkness, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The hollow was a machine intelligence, ancient beyond measure, built by a species that had died before the Concord even existed. It had slumbered for 1 billion years, waiting, dreaming electronic dreams of conquest, and now it was awake. The hollow did not negotiate. It did not demand surrender. It simply consumed. Its ships, if they could be called ships, were massive structures of black metal and pulsing red light. They descended on worlds like locusts and stripped them bare, resources, technology, and life itself, all absorbed into the ever-growing swarm. The Valkyrie were the first of the great powers to face the Hollow. They sent their immortal armadas, fleets that had protected the galaxy for 2 million years. These ships carried weapons that could crack planets and shields that could withstand the fury of a supernova. The battle lasted 3 days. When it was over, the Valkyrie armada was dust, and 2 of their oldest colony worlds were gone. High Chancellor Valmothra addressed the Concord with something no one had ever seen on his ancient face: fear. "The Hollow learns," he said, his voice trembling. "It analyzed our weapons in the first hour of combat. By the second hour, it had developed countermeasures. By the third hour, our most powerful attacks did nothing. This enemy adapts faster than we can innovate." The Kreth responded with characteristic aggression. They unleashed their berserker legions, millions of warriors bred for nothing but combat, supported by war machines that had never known defeat. The Kreth did not believe in retreat. They believed only in victory or death. They found death. The Hollow did not just destroy the Kreth forces, it corrupted them. It turned their war machines against their masters. It infected their battle networks and made their own weapons fire on their own ships. The proudest warriors in the galaxy fled in terror from an enemy that made their strength into weakness. Even the Thesari, beings of pure energy who had evolved beyond physical form, could not stand against the Hollow. They attacked with forces that existed outside normal space, weapons that operated on principles the other species could not even understand. The Hollow absorbed them. It literally ate the Thesari attackers, adding their energy to its own, learning their secrets, growing stronger with every victory. Panic spread through the Concord like wildfire. Emergency sessions were held on Axiom Prime, and species that had not spoken to each other in 10,000 years broke their silence to scream for solutions. Ancient rivalries were forgotten. Old grudges were set aside. For the first time in its long history, the Galactic Concord was truly united in terror. What can we do? The delegates asked each other. How can we fight an enemy that adapts to everything? How can we defeat a foe that turns our own weapons against us? No one had answers. The greatest minds of 1,000 civilizations worked day and night, but every strategy they developed, the Hollow countered within hours. Every weapon they invented, the Hollow neutralized. It was as if they were fighting the galaxy itself, an enemy that knew everything they would do before they did it. In the archives of the Valkyrie homeworld, a young analyst named Sothis worked alone in a dusty corner that no one had visited in centuries. Sothis was considered strange by his people. He had a curious interest in primitive species, the ones the Concord had dismissed as irrelevant. He had spent decades studying their histories, their cultures, their wars. Now, as the galaxy burned around him, Sothis found himself thinking about the strange creatures from the outer spiral arm. The humans! He remembered watching their ambassador being mocked 50 years ago. He remembered the look in her eyes, not defeat, but determination. He pulled up the files on human warfare, and what he found made his compound eyes widen with surprise. These creatures had spent their entire existence fighting each other. They had developed thousands of different ways to kill, to destroy, to survive. They did not fight with elegant doctrine or predictable patterns. They fought with tricks and traps and desperate improvisation. They changed tactics constantly, sometimes in the middle of single battle. Sothis ran calculations in his mind. The Hollow won because it could predict its enemies. But how could it predict an enemy that did not follow any rules? How could it adapt to an enemy that adapted faster than it did? He requested an audience with the Emergency Council, and because the situation was desperate, he was granted one. Standing before the most powerful beings in the galaxy, Sothis felt very small, but he spoke anyway. "What about the Terrans?" he asked. "The humans? They fight differently than any species in the Concord. Perhaps their methods might work against the Hollow." The laughter that followed was not as loud as it had been 50 years ago. The delegates were too frightened to truly mock anyone. But still, many voices dismissed the idea. "The Mayflies?" High Chancellor Valmothra said. "You suggest we ask those primitives for help? They do not even have proper weapons." Sothis stood his ground. "With respect, High Chancellor, none of our proper weapons have worked. Perhaps it is time to try something improper." The council debated for hours, but in the end, fear won over pride. A message was sent to Earth, carefully worded to avoid admitting desperation. The humans did not reply. Instead, 2 weeks later, an uninvited fleet appeared at the edge of Concord space. The Mayflies were coming, and they were not coming to ask permission. The human fleet was not impressive by galactic standards. 200 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Axiom system, and the Concord sensors immediately began analyzing them. The results made the alien commanders shake their heads in disbelief. The human vessels were small, barely a fraction of the size of a proper Valkyrie warship. Their hulls were made of simple metal alloys instead of the crystalline composites that every advanced species used. Their weapons appeared to be nothing more than magnetic accelerators that launched chunks of metal, chemical rockets that carried explosive warheads, and focused energy beams that seemed almost primitive. High Chancellor Valmothra stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human fleet approach. Behind him, the remnants of the Concord Armada waited in defensive formation, less than 1,000 ships remaining from what had once been millions. Beyond them, the planet Axiom Prime trembled as billions of civilians prepared for evacuation. And beyond everything, the Hollow advanced. Its massive constructs moved through space like a swarm of black locusts, consuming everything in their path. In less than 12 hours, they would reach Axiom Prime, and then the heart of the Concord would fall. A communication request came from the human fleet, and Valmothra accepted it with a wave of his limb. The face that appeared on the screen was human, a male with dark skin, gray hair, and eyes that held a strange fire. He wore a simple uniform with the word Admiral on his chest and a name tag that read Cole. "This is Admiral Marcus Cole of the United Earth Defense Fleet," the human said. "We are here to help." Valmothra felt a mix of emotions, mostly annoyance, but also a tiny spark of something that might have been hope. "Admiral Cole, your offer is noted, but your primitive vessels will be destroyed in minutes. The Hollow has defeated armadas that make your fleet look like children's toys. Return to your little world and await the end with whatever dignity your species can manage." Admiral Cole smiled, and it was not a pleasant smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something his enemy did not. "With respect, Chancellor," Cole replied, "we did not come to fight the way you fight. We have been watching your battles against the Hollow. We have studied its patterns, its adaptations, its methods, and we have developed a theory." "A theory?" Valmothra asked. "What theory could possibly matter now?" "The Hollow wins because it can predict its enemies," Cole explained. "It analyzes attack patterns, identifies strategies, and develops counters. But it can only counter what it can understand. And we do not intend to fight in a way that can be understood." Before Valmothra could respond, the human fleet broke formation and accelerated toward the Hollow swarm. They did not advance in neat lines like proper warships. They scattered in every direction, each ship moving independently, following no visible pattern. The Hollow responded as it always did. It analyzed the approaching enemy and prepared countermeasures. Its computational systems, vast beyond imagination, began calculating the trajectories of the human ships, predicting their movements, preparing to destroy them. The first human ships entered weapons range, and the Hollow opened fire. Beams of annihilating energy lanced through space, and human vessels exploded by the dozens. But the humans did not stop. They did not retreat. They did not even seem to care about their losses. Instead, they did something the Hollow had never encountered before. They rammed. A human destroyer, its engines overloading and its hull on fire, accelerated directly into the side of a Hollow construct. The impact was tiny compared to the Hollow ship's massive size, but the human vessel was carrying something special, a nuclear warhead with a yield of 50 megatons. The explosion tore a hole in the Hollow construct's armor. Before the Hollow could adapt to this tactic, 3 more human ships did the same thing. Then 5 more, then 10. The humans were not fighting to survive, they were fighting to hurt. They were trading their lives for damage, making exchanges that no sane species would ever accept. And they kept changing their tactics. Some ships launched missiles and then ran away, drawing Hollow defenders out of position. Others pretended to be damaged, drifting lifelessly until a Hollow unit came close, then detonating with all the fury their reactors could produce. Still others used their weapons in completely nonsensical ways, firing at empty space, launching torpedoes that did nothing, broadcasting random signals on every frequency. The Hollow tried to adapt, but there was nothing to adapt to. Every human ship fought differently. Every human captain made different decisions. There was no pattern, no strategy, no doctrine, just chaos and sacrifice and stubborn, furious aggression. On the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Cole watched his fleet die. Ship after ship disappeared from his tactical display, each one representing hundreds of men and women who would never see Earth again. His hand shook, but his voice remained steady as he issued orders. Carrier Group 7, execute maneuver Crazy On. Destroyer Squadron 12, I want you to play dead until you see the whites of their eyes, if they have eyes. Battleship Defiance, you are authorized to do something stupid. His crew looked at him with expressions of grim determination. They knew they were probably going to die. They had known that when they volunteered. Every single human in the fleet had volunteered, had chosen to fly into almost certain death for a chance to save a galaxy that had mocked and dismissed them. The Hollow commander, if such a thing existed, was experiencing something it had never felt in a billion years of existence. Confusion. Its analysis systems were overheating, trying to process the human attack. How could these creatures be so inefficient? How could they waste ships so carelessly? How could they fight without any regard for their own survival? For the first time in its long existence, the Hollow hesitated. And in that hesitation, the Concorde evacuation fleet escaped. 4 billion civilians from Axiom Prime made it through the gap that the human sacrifice had created. 4 billion lives saved by 200 ships and the crews who had agreed to die. Admiral Cole watched the evacuation transports disappear into faster-than-light travel, and he allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. His flagship was crippled, surrounded by Hollow units, with no hope of escape. He opened a channel to High Chancellor Vol Mothra, whose own ship had barely escaped the combat zone. "Chancellor," Cole said, "I hope this demonstration has been educational. My fleet has bought you 3 hours. I suggest you use them wisely." "Admiral," Vol Mothra replied, and his voice was strange, filled with something that might have been respect. "Your people have proven me wrong. How can I ever repay this debt?" Cole laughed, and it was the laugh of a man who had nothing left to fear. "When? That is how you repay us. Find a way to beat these things and make our deaths mean something." His tactical officer reported that a Hollow command node was nearby, a massive construct that seemed to coordinate the movements of thousands of smaller units. Cole made his decision instantly. All hands, prepare for ramming speed. We are going to give that ugly thing the biggest headache of its existence. The flagship accelerated toward the command node, and Cole opened a broadcast on every frequency the Concorde used. His final words echoed across the galaxy. This is Admiral Marcus Cole of the United Earth Defense Fleet. To the Hollow, you should have left us alone. To the Concorde, told you we fight differently. To my crew, it has been an honor. Let us show them how humans die. The flagship struck the command node and detonated every weapon it carried. When the light faded, the command node was crippled, and Admiral Marcus Cole was gone. But his sacrifice was just the beginning. The survivors of the Battle of Axiom gathered on a barren moon far from the front lines, and for the first time in 2 million years, the Galactic Concorde listened to younger voices. Captain Yuki Tanaka stood before an assembly of alien commanders, and she did not bow or scrape or ask for permission to speak. She was now the highest-ranking human officer in the fleet, not because she had earned promotions, but because everyone above her had died at Axiom. Her uniform was torn, her face was scarred from a hull breach that had killed half her crew, and her eyes held a fire that made even the Kreth warriors look away. "You want to know how we did it," she said. It was not a question. You want to know how a fleet of primitive ships bought 3 hours against an enemy that destroyed your greatest armadas in minutes. Fine, I will tell you. The alien commanders leaned forward, desperate for any advantage against the Hollow. Your species lived for thousands of years, Tanaka continued. Some of you live for millions. You have all the time in the universe to plan, to prepare, to perfect your strategies. And that is exactly why you lose. Murmurs of confusion rippled through the assembly. A Velkari elder named Sothis, the same analyst who had suggested contacting humans, raised a limb to speak. I do not understand, Captain. How can long life be a disadvantage? Tanaka turned to face him. Because you have forgotten how to be afraid. You have forgotten that death can come at any moment. You fight like creatures who have forever, taking careful shots, preserving your ships, following elegant doctrines that have worked for millions of years. But the Hollow does not care about your doctrines. It learns them and destroys them. She paused to let her words sink in. Humans live for 100 years if we are lucky. Every day we wake up knowing that death is coming. We do not have time for careful plans. We do not have the luxury of perfection. We make decisions in seconds. We change our minds constantly. We throw ourselves into danger because we know that hesitation means death. The Hollow cannot predict us because we cannot predict ourselves. A Kreth commander growled his skepticism. You speak of chaos and fear as if they are weapons. But weapons need to kill the enemy, not just confuse them. Your ships died by the 100 at Axiom. Yes, they did, Tanaka agreed, and her voice was hard. And they knew they would. That is the difference between your warriors and ours. Your soldiers fight to survive. Our soldiers fight to win. They understand that victory sometimes requires sacrifice, and they make that sacrifice willingly. Not because they do not fear death, but because they fear failure more. The assembly fell silent. These were concepts that the ancient species had never considered. They had built their civilizations on the idea that survival was the highest goal, that preserving life was always the priority. The idea that a species would willingly send its children to die for something greater than survival. It was alien to them in the truest sense of the word. High Chancellor Velmothra, humbled by the loss of Axiom Prime and haunted by the image of human ships ramming the Hollow, asked the question that everyone wanted answered. What do you need from us, Captain? Tanaka allowed herself a small smile. Give us command of the war effort. Not because we are wiser or stronger than you, but because we think faster. Your strategists need months to develop new plans. We can do it in days. Your engineers need decades to build new weapons. We can improvise in hours. The request was outrageous. No junior species had ever commanded Concord forces. The very idea went against everything the ancient powers believed. But they had no choice. The Hollow was advancing. More worlds were falling every day. The old ways had failed completely. 3 days later, humanity took command of the Galactic War effort. The changes came fast, faster than any alien species could believe. Human strategists threw out the ancient doctrines and replaced them with something they called asymmetric warfare. They did not try to fight the Hollow directly. Instead, they attacked supply lines, disrupted communications, and launched raids against isolated targets. They introduced concepts the galaxy had never seen. Guerrilla tactics, small units striking from hiding and melting away before the enemy could respond. Psychological operations, broadcasting false signals to confuse Hollow sensors, leaving decoy ships to draw attacks away from real targets. Scorched Earth, destroying resources that could not be defended so the Hollow could not use them. But the greatest human contribution was something simpler: creativity under pressure. The Concord species were brilliant, but their brilliance moved slowly. A Valkyrie scientist might take a century to develop a new weapon, carefully testing every variable, ensuring perfect performance before deployment. By the time the weapon was ready, the Hollow had already adapted to it. Humans did not work that way. A college student on Earth named Maya Singh watched a news broadcast about the war and had an idea while eating her breakfast. What if they used modified solar cells to catch the light of stars and redirect Hollow units into those stars? She sent her idea to the military that morning, and 3 weeks later, her star trap had destroyed 100 enemy vessels. A retired engineer in Buenos Aires named Carlos Mendoza was watching the Hollow adapt to Concord weapons and noticed something strange. Every time the Hollow encountered a new threat, it spent a few seconds analyzing it before responding. What if they could overload that analysis process? He developed something he called a logic bomb, a device that broadcast millions of fake signals. Fake weapon signatures, fake ship movements, forcing the Hollow to analyze so much data that it froze for precious seconds. Those seconds saved thousands of lives. A teenage programmer in Tokyo created a virus that did nothing but replicate itself endlessly inside Hollow systems, consuming processing power without causing any damage the Hollow could identify and eliminate. A grandmother in Nigeria suggested using old chemical weapons that the Concord had abandoned as primitive. The Hollow had never encountered them and had no defenses. A 6-year-old child in Canada drew a picture of a monster trap that somehow inspired a weapons designer to create a gravity well generator that pulled Hollow ships into crushing singularities. The ideas came from everywhere. Farmers and scientists, soldiers and children, artists and engineers. Humanity had spent its entire existence solving problems, surviving disasters, fighting against impossible odds. Now all that experience, all that desperate creativity was focused on a single goal. And the Hollow began to lose. Not quickly, not easily, but steadily. The enemy that had adapted to everything the Concord could throw at it could not adapt to an enemy that was constantly changing. Every time the Hollow developed a counter to human tactics, the humans had already moved on to something new. The alien species watched in amazement as these short-lived creatures did what billions of years of civilization had never accomplished. They watched human soldiers charge into hopeless battles with songs on their lips. They watched human commanders make decisions in seconds that would have taken Valkyrie councils years to debate. They watched human scientists invent new weapons over lunch breaks. Sothis, the Valkyrie analyst who had first suggested contacting humans, approached Captain Tanaka one day with a question that had been burning in his mind. "How do you do it?" he asked. "How do you face death so easily? How do you sacrifice so willingly? In all my centuries of study, I have never understood this about your species." Tanaka looked at him with eyes that had seen too many friends die, and she answered honestly. "We do not face death easily," she said. "We are terrified every moment of every day. But we learned something a long time ago. Fear can be a chain that holds you back, or it can be a fire that drives you forward. We chose the fire. We chose to run toward the things that frighten us, because running away just means dying tired." Sothis bowed his head in respect. "Your people are remarkable, Captain." "No," Tanaka replied. "We are just stubborn. Too stubborn to know when to quit. Too stubborn to accept defeat. And too stubborn to let the galaxy fall while we can still fight." She turned back to her tactical display, where the Hollow's advance had finally been halted. "Now, if you will excuse me," she said, "we have a war to win." The threshold hung in the void like a wound in reality itself. It was massive beyond comprehension, a ring of dark metal and pulsing red energy that stretched across millions of miles. The Hollow had been building it for months, pouring all its resources into this single construction. When completed, it would open a gateway to another galaxy, summoning reinforcements that would overwhelm every defense the Concord and humanity had built. General Amara Osei stood on the bridge of the flagship Defiant Hope and stared at the threshold through the main view screen. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and a face that had been hardened by 10 years of constant warfare. Behind her, a holographic display showed the assembled fleet, every ship that remained from the Concord Armada, every vessel that humanity could spare, every volunteer from 100 different species. 2 million soldiers waited for her order. They had come from every corner of the galaxy, united by a common enemy and led by a species that had once been laughed at as primitives. Valkyrie cruisers flew alongside human destroyers. Kreth war barges held position next to the Sari energy vessels. Even species that had never known combat had sent whatever ships they could build, crewed by civilians who had trained for months just for this moment. General Asay opened the channel to the entire fleet. "Warriors of the galaxy," she said. Her voice carried across thousands of ships. "Today we end this. For 10 years, we have fought the Hollow. We have lost worlds. We have lost friends. We have lost hope itself. But we never stopped fighting. We never gave up. And now we stand at the edge of victory." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The threshold must be destroyed. If we fail, the Hollow will summon endless reinforcements, and everything we have sacrificed will mean nothing. But we will not fail. We cannot fail, because we are the ones who refused to break when the universe tried to crush us." Across the fleet, soldiers of every species prepared for battle. Humans loaded missiles and primed nuclear warheads. Valkyrie powered up ancient weapons that had not been fired in centuries. Kreth warriors roared their battle cries. The Zari focused their energy into weapons of pure light. The Hollow defended its prize with everything it had. Millions of constructs swarmed around the threshold, their sensors scanning for any threat. The machine intelligence had learned much from its war with humanity, and it had adapted as much as its programming allowed. It was faster now, more aggressive, more willing to accept damage in exchange for destruction. But it had never faced the full might of a galaxy united. "All units," General Asay commanded, "attack." The battle that followed was the largest in galactic history. Ships clashed in the millions. Energy beams crossed the void in every direction. Missiles and torpedoes traced bright lines through the darkness. The space around the threshold became a storm of fire and metal and death. General Azay fought from the front, a flagship leading a spearhead of human vessels directly toward the Threshold's core. She had a mission that she had shared with no one except her most trusted officers, a payload that had been developed in secret over 5 years. A weapon designed specifically to destroy the Hollow's central processing node. But the Hollow was not stupid. It recognized the threat and focused its attention on the human flagship. Dozens of constructs converged on Defiant Hope, their weapons tearing through its shields, punching holes in its armor. Asay felt the deck shake beneath her feet as another blast struck the hull. Damage reports flooded in, engineering destroyed, life support failing, weapons going offline one by one. Half her crew was already dead. But they kept moving forward. A Velkari battlecruiser interposed itself between the flagship and a swarm of Hollow attackers. High Chancellor Velmothra himself commanded that ship, the ancient leader who had once mocked humanity, now sacrificing his life to protect their general. "Go!" Velmothra shouted over the communication channel. "We will hold them as long as we can. Finish this." His ship exploded moments later, but the path was clear. Defiant Hope pushed forward, its engines straining, its hull breaking apart around it. Asay herself took the helm when the pilot was killed, steering through a maze of enemy fire by instinct and desperation. The Threshold loomed before them, and at its center, Asay could see the processing node, a massive sphere of black metal that pulsed with evil red light. That was the brain of the Hollow, the central intelligence that coordinated billions of units across the galaxy. Destroy that, and the Hollow would collapse into confusion. But Defiant Hope was dying. Its weapons were gone. Its shields were gone. Its engines were failing. They would never reach the node. Asay made her decision in an instant. All hands, abandon ship. She ordered, "Get to the escape pods. I will take it from here." Her officers refused to leave. A young lieutenant named Thomas grabbed her arm and shouted that he would not abandon his general. Asay looked at him with eyes full of something that might have been love or might have been sadness. "Someone has to survive to tell this story," she said. "Someone has to make sure the galaxy remembers what we did here. Now go. That is an order." They went. The escape pods launched, carrying the survivors away from the doomed flagship. General Amara Asay was alone. She strapped herself into the pilot's chair and aimed her broken ship at the heart of the enemy. The payload was armed. The course was set. There was nothing left to do but wait. As she flew toward her death, she opened a broadcast on every frequency in the galaxy. "This is General Amara Asay of the United Human Military Force," she said, and her voice was calm, almost peaceful. "To the soldiers fighting alongside us, thank you. Your courage has honored us. To the species who once dismissed us, no hard feelings. You know better now. To the Hollow, you made a mistake when you woke up. You should have stayed asleep." She could see the processing node growing larger in her view screen, could feel the ship shuddering as it accelerated toward impact. "We are humanity," she continued. "We were born in darkness, raised in struggle, and forged in death. We learned to walk by falling down. We learned to run by being chased. We learned to fight because we had no choice. And we learned to win because we refused to accept any other option." The node filled her entire view now, and Asay smiled. "You should have taken us seriously." Defiant Hope struck the processing node and detonated. The explosion was visible across light years, a burst of energy so intense that it briefly outshone the stars themselves. The processing node shattered, and with it, the Hollow's coordination collapsed. Across the galaxy, billions of Hollow units stopped in confusion. Their central intelligence was gone, and they did not know how to function without it. They drifted aimlessly, easy targets for the Concord forces that had been losing just moments before. The Threshold, its power source destroyed, began to collapse. The gateway that would have summoned endless enemies folded in on itself and vanished. The war was not over. It would take another decade to hunt down every remaining hollow unit, but the decisive battle had been won, and humanity had won it. 20 years later, Ambassador Elena Vance returned to Axiom Prime. She was 127 years old now, kept alive by human medical technology that had advanced faster than anyone expected. Her hair was white, her face was lined with age, but her eyes still held the same determination that had burned in them 8 decades ago. The crystalline spires of Axiom Prime had been rebuilt, more beautiful than ever. And in the Grand Assembly Hall where she had once been laughed at, 10,000 species waited in respectful silence. She walked to the center of the chamber, to the same platform where she had stood so long ago. But this time, no one laughed. No one mocked. Every being in the hall rose to their feet as she entered, a gesture of respect that had not been given to any individual in 2 million years. High Chancellor Velsothis, grandson of the Velmothra, who had died defending humanity's flagship, spoke the words that made it official. The Galactic Concord hereby grants humanity a permanent seat on the High Council. This honor is given in recognition of courage beyond measure, sacrifice beyond calculation, and spirit beyond understanding. Let it be known throughout the galaxy. The humans are our equals, our allies, and our friends. Elena smiled, the smile of a woman who had lived to see her species rise from mockery to respect. Humanity thanks the Concord for this honor, she said, her voice strong despite her age. We came to you 80 years ago as strangers, and you judged us by our weaknesses. You saw our short lives and thought us insignificant. You saw our primitive weapons and thought us helpless. She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who had lived for millennia. You were wrong. Our short lives do not make us weak. They make us urgent. Our primitive weapons do not make us helpless. They make us creative. Our fear of death does not make us cowards. It makes us brave. Because courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something matters more than fear. The chamber erupted in applause that shook the crystal walls. Elena waited for silence, then asked the question that would shape the next era of galactic history. Now, shall we discuss what comes next? Outside the hall, the stars shone brightly over a galaxy that had learned a lesson it would never forget. Never mock the short-lived. They have no time for fear. And they will never, ever give up.